Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 9 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs. The first 5 main articles are as follows. In the first topic, we'll try to understand about the legal framework behind the RBI's surplus transfer to the central government and how it shall be judiciously utilized. In the second topic, we'll try to read about the rationale behind the establishment of the National Research Foundation and the recent issues related to it. In the third topic, we'll try to understand what is cabinet committees and the recent appointment of certain committees by the central government. Followed by the fourth topic, where we'll try to learn about the global partnership on artificial intelligence, which is led by our country. And finally, in the fifth topic, we will learn about the World Heritage Committee, and we'll also try to solve certain questions which appeared in your prelims examination 2024. Towards the end, there will be news snippets especially curated to help you excel in the prelims examination, so stay tuned. The editorial raises an important question in the backdrop of RBI's transferring 2.11 lakh crore to the central government of India, that how such surplus shall be utilized. This surplus transfer done by the Reserve Bank of India to the central bank and its larger impact on our Indian economy forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of issues related to the Indian economy. So before we try to dwell upon that what is the legal framework behind such surplus and what impact it will have on our economy, let's first try to understand India's current fiscal status. Just right before the budget 2024, which is supposed to be released in this month itself. Now imagine yourself as a materialistic person, where you spend around 1 lakh rupees a month, while your income or your revenue generation is only limited to 50,000 rupees a month. What does this structure basically implies is that you are incurring a deficit of 50,000 rupees. Now, India being a socialistic country where it has to invest a lot on our health, education, public infrastructure, it also incurs a similar kind of deficit. So, for example, if we look at the data, India's 30-year average revenue generation has been around 9.8% of our total GDP. While India's spending of the last 30 years is around 14.9% of the GDP. Thus, as per the interim budget of 2024, India currently incurs around 5.1% of the fiscal deficit, which means that this is the gap which exists between India's income generation and the expenditure which India is doing. And that gap which exists is around 5.1% of the total gross domestic product value of our country. Now, when we have understood this, let's try to imagine another scenario where, being a materialistic person, you keep on spending on materialistic goods, such as you keep on buying new shoes, keep on buying new shirts. Now, as your expenditure is continuously increasing, so does the expenditure of the government as well, where the capital expenditure of the government has consistently increased in the last few years, specifically after the COVID pandemic which incurred in the year of 2019, and it reached to around 110 lakh crore rupees in the year of 2023. Now, what does we mean or understand from this capital expenditure? So keep 2 important keywords in your mind. Capital expenditure is something which creates a kind of a permanent asset for the government, and from this permanent asset the government gets a kind of a consistent revenue supply. So for example, let's say government is creating a government school, or for example a government is creating a public hospital, or to understand it simply, let's say the government is creating a kind of a highway on which it is charging toll from the people. All of this forms the component of your capital expenditure. Now, as this, we can see that this capital expenditure is consistently increasing, and that is also the reason for this high fiscal deficit which exists. For example, this 5.1% of GDP actually translates to 16.85 trillion of rupees. So this is the kind of deficit which exists currently for our country. Now, remember that you are a materialistic person, so you are keep on increasing your expenditure. Now, how you will be able to expend this much? So, you need to do two things. One, either you will increase your revenue or income, you will try to work hard, generate more income, or you will just start borrowing to fund your expenditure. The government exactly do these two things as well. So, how government can increase its revenue generation? It do that by increasing the taxes which it charges from the people. So for example, as you guys can see on the table, the direct tax collection, that includes your corporate tax as well as income tax, that has significantly increased in the last few years, as well as your indirect taxes such as your goods and services tax, your union excise duty, as well as your custom, that has been consistently increasing as well. So what we can see from the table is that the government has consistently increased its revenue generation. At the same time, if this revenue generation is not sufficient enough to fund the expenditure which is being incurred by the government will have to enter into the market to borrow, which is basically called as market borrowing. Now let's try to understand the mechanism of this market borrowing. So basically, RBI, that is Reserve Bank of India, it releases the government securities in the market in the form of bonds, and these government securities are purchased by the large financial firms. Now what government says that now these firms are borrowing the government securities, so they are basically providing the revenue or kind of a income to the government. The government says that in the return of this income, I am going to provide you yield. Yield is basically your interest rate. Now, try to imagine a kind of a financial situation where a kind of a financial crisis is occurring. Just imagine in your mind another lockdown taking place like 2020. So in that particular case, it is obvious that the government will not be able to generate income through these taxes, right? Because the whole economy is shut down. The government cannot increase its taxes at that particular stage, because at the end of the day, this government is elected by the people. So if you will increase taxes exorbitantly, how it was being charged by the British government from the Indians through permanent settlement system, revenue, Raiyatwari system, all of that. So it is obvious that the people will revolt against you. It will bring you down from the government. So government, if it cannot increase the taxes significantly, it can become more dependent upon this market borrowing. So in the case of a financial crisis, basically now these firms gets to know that the government is in the dire need of money. So they will say that increase the yield or interest rate on the bonds. So for the bonds of the same face value, the government will have to significantly pay much more interest rate, or the yield will increase. So keep this in mind that this increasing yield is also the sign of financial crisis which is taking place in the market, in the economy. Now, again, we can say that in the case of such economic crisis, the financial stability is distorted, as well as the borrowing cost of the government that increase significantly as well. And this has exactly been happening in the recent years, which you can see from the table, where with increase in the market borrowing, the yield on these market borrowing was increasing as well, which means that the government had to pay much more money for the same amount of borrowing which it was doing earlier. Now, in spite of all of this poor financial health condition, this surplus which has been transferred by the Reserve Bank of India, that has actually come for the government as a sign of respite. Now, let's first try to understand that what is this RBI surplus. So, RBI is basically a central bank which has been established by the RBI Act of 1934. Now here RBI, as all other banks, earns some amount of money. How it earns the money? It earns the money from the profits which it generates through selling and purchasing of bonds, or the treasury bills of the government, or various kind of loans which it offers to other banks, as well as it also does some kind of investments that can be in our country or foreign investments as well. It also has got some gold assets. So from all of this income which is being generated by the RBI, at the same time RBI also has certain expenses. Expenses in the sense, let's say it can be your normal operational cost, or it can be the cost of printing the money. So for example, the note which you are having in your pocket right now, on which there is the sign of the RBI's governor, so that is being printed by the RBI. On that it incur cost as well, right? At the same time, there can be some payments to the staff and all of that. So if we just do a simple math where we calculate the net income of RBI and its net expenditure, so by that we can generate the total amount of surplus which RBI might have generated in a particular year. Now RBI is the central bank of the country, which means it is the government's bank. So in that particular case, the section 47 of the RBI Act of 1934, it actually mandates the RBI to transfer this surplus to the central government. Now, how to calculate that how much surplus shall be kept by the RBI or it shall be transferred to the central government? This was provided under the economic capital framework, which was calculated by the Bimal Jalan Committee of 2018. So what was the finding of the Bimal Jalan Committee 2018? It said that first of all, there is no internationally laid down risk capital framework for any central bank in the world. Each and every central bank has their own mechanism to calculate how much surplus should it keep and how much surplus it should transfer to the government. At the same time, Bimal Jalan Committee pointed out that at that time, RBI's economic capital, which existed at around 26% of its balance sheet, was the fifth largest among the central banks of the world. What is RBI's economic capital? It is exactly what we were discussing. Any kind of assets which RBI is holding, any kind of capital which it has, the gold assets which it has, or for example, the foreign exchange reserves which it has, or if RBI has invested in any kind of bonds. So all of this forms the economic capital of the RBI. At the same time, from this profit, RBI also keep a kind of a contingent risk buffer. So let's say if in the future, if there is some financial or market crisis is going to happen, remember that RBI is considered as the last lender for all the banks in our country. That is the major role which it plays as a central bank, and this was also the question which was asked in your prelims paper in the recent years. So now, when it is keeping this contingent risk buffer to just tackle with any kind of market volatility which can take place in the future, the Bimal Jalan Committee said that from this surplus, at least 5.5 or till 6.5% of that shall be kept as surplus. Currently, in this particular year, 6.5%, which is the highest limit set by the Bimal Jalan Committee, that has been kept as contingent risk buffer. And the committee said that the rest of the money left shall be transferred to the central government. So this year, the RBI has transferred around 2.11 lakh rupees to the central government, which is almost 140% increase from the last year. Remember that there is a fixed amount which RBI is going to give to the government. This increase or decrease actually depends upon the amount of surplus which RBI has generated over the years, right? Now, when we have understood about this surplus, what can be its impact on our economy? So first of all, obviously it will increase the capital expenditure of the government, because government has now got additional 2.1 lakh crore rupees with it. So it can lead to building up of more roads, more schools, more infrastructure. Then what it can lead to is the fiscal consolidation, because this 2.1 lakh crore transferred by the RBI actually provides the government a fiscal space of 0.3% of the GDP. which basically means that now the government will have to borrow less for this year, and thus the government can actually aim to achieve the target of getting to 4.5% of GDP's fiscal deficit by the financial year of 2025 and 26. Thus, this surplus can actually let the government to follow the path of fiscal consolidation. Now again, the government's borrowing requirement has reduced. So we can also guess that because the borrowing requirement has reduced, now the government will depend less on the bonds, on the market borrowings which it was doing. Because of that, it was obvious that the yield on those bonds will decline as well. So there will now be the stabilization of yield. As well as this fund can actually act as a contingency fund for the future revenue deficit which government might occur. At the same time, it can also cover the disinvestment targets by the government. So government is basically trying to do the disinvestments in the public sector units, especially the ones which are not profitable. So government this year has set for itself an ambitious target of 50,000 crore of disinvestment. That is almost 67% higher from the last year of 2023. However, keep this in mind that the last 3 deficit targets in the last 3 fiscal years, the government has consistently missed on that. So this surplus can actually provide a kind of a buffer to these disinvestment targets falls which government is facing. At the same time, there are chances that this surplus which government has now incurred, so government will not increase the taxes on the normal public like you and me, and thus the tax burden can actually decrease. So if the taxes will increase, it will left with the people with more money to spend, so propensity to consume will increase, and all that can actually be a positive feedback to the overall economy, because if the demand is increasing, the production will increase as well. Now, there are certain suggestions which has been provided by the editorial that how to judiciously utilize this particular surplus. So the article says that first of all, it is not completely apprehensive, but it says that we should not dwell into the high capital expenditure because we need to learn a lesson from China. So for example, what China has done, that it just went into the capital expenditure spree. It started creating a lot of infrastructure. So for example, it created almost 2 to 3 airports in one city itself. And now majority of them are dysfunctional or not generating any kind of significant revenue. So China is actually facing a lot of difficulty to pay on the loan which it had taken to create this infrastructure. So the article suggests that we should not go into such blind spree of capital expenditure, which we have been doing especially in the recent years. Rather, we should do this capital expenditure on sustaining the projects on which we have already invested and we have created a sound infrastructure. So for example, instead of just launching a new train or a new bullet train, we are launching a new trains after another. At the same time, we have to decrease the speed of Vande Bharat recently from 160 km per hour to 120 km per hour because of the poor infrastructure which exists. So the article suggests that we need to improve this existing infrastructure instead of just creating a new one. The third is that we need to create the modern enterprises instead of revitalizing the dead enterprises such as MTNL, BSNL, all of that. And finally, the article suggests that we should follow the fiscal consolidation on the lines of the Fiscal Responsibility and the Budget Management Act of 2023, which says that the government shall reduce its fiscal deficit up to 3% of GDP. Right now, we have set for ourselves a target of 4.5% of GDP. So these are the innovative suggestions which has been provided by the editorial, and on the basis of this, try to solve this particular practice question. If possible, comment your answers in the comment box and we move forward to the next news. The article highlights the various issues that have surrounded the ambitious Anusandhan National Research Foundation or ANRF. What was the rationale behind the establishment of National Research Foundation? And what are the issues which are actually surrounding NRF right now? We will discuss that and much more under this theme which aligns with your GS3 paper under your theme of science and technology. So just try to imagine an idea of Viksit Bharat in your head. something which we are trying to achieve by the year of 2047. Just imagine that there exists a kind of a bullet train which is connecting two mega cities. Imagine traveling from Bombay to Delhi in the span of 2 hours. Or let's say imagine that at one point of a time we will have such an advanced educational infrastructure where the students in the classroom itself are watching at holograms which are being created by artificial intelligence to improve their learning. Or for example, just imagine this lecture itself, where I am telling you about a critically endangered species of great Indian bustard, and suddenly a hologram appears here which tells you about their distribution in our country. Wouldn't that support your learning? Wouldn't that make it much more interesting and easier for you? Now, what are the basic requirements to do all of this, to create this bullet infrastructure, to create this artificial intelligence infrastructure? That is basically a sound research and development infrastructure. However, sadly in our country there exists a poor state of research and development infrastructure. And to prove that to the examiner, we will be taking the help of UNESCO Science Report of 2021. According to which it shows actually that in our country we have a very less skilled population which is capable enough to do this advanced research and innovations. So for example, if we look at the researchers per million population, India has an abysmal low number of 262. Just look at the staggering numbers which Israel has per million population, or for example Japan, USA, or even your China, almost 7 times more than us. At the same time, if we look at the doctorates which are being produced in our country, that is around 59%. Just look at the numbers which China has or which Israel has. Even when we are producing these doctorates, most of them confined to the reasons of engineering and technology and science, and very less to the modern day requirements of veterinary science, agriculture, or your medicine. At the same time, even in the field of this science and innovation, there is a skewed gender gap. Just look at the data which has been provided here. Just look at the abysmal numbers of women researchers in your research and development institutions. Thus, in our country, there exists a low-skilled population to perform this advanced infrastructure, and that also reflects in the abysmal numbers of the patents which are being filed by our country. For example, back in 2021, India was filing around 61,000 patents every year, which is almost 20 times lesser than the staggering number of China, or almost 7 to 8 times lesser than USA. So now when we have understood about this low skilled population which exists, which reflects in the low number of patents or the research which we are claiming that we have done it first, on the basis of which we can become the harbinger of research and innovation in the world. So if that is abysmally low, a major reason for that is the poor gross expenditure on research and development which exists in our country. So just look at this particular table here. Just look at our gross expenditure on research and development, which instead of increasing has remained stagnant around 0.7% of the GDP. And when it comes to the countries with maximum expenditure on research and development, which is the need of the future, India is at abysmally low at 10th rank. Just look at Israel here. Just look at USA here. Or for example, just see that how our percentage is almost 10 times lesser than these countries. Now, here just remember two important details. One is that almost this expenditure which you are looking at, that is 0.7% of the GDP, 56% of that actually comes from the government itself. Only 34% of this expenditure actually comes from the private sector. If we will look or compare ourselves with other technologically advanced countries, let's say for example Israel, in their countries almost 88% of this gross expenditure on research and development, it actually comes from the private sector. Even when this expenditure is being done, the target area was mostly the elite institutions. So for example, it is obvious that we are not producing any Ramanujan or any other mind like APJ Abdul Kalam in our rural areas anymore. It is basically confined to the elite institutions from where there are certain talented people who come out, and many of them actually just go and work for the other foreign companies or institutes. That was also a major complaint which was done by the ISRO chairman, that all of these brilliant students or brilliant minds from these elite institutions are not interested to join the biggest scientific body of our country, that is ISRO. And that actually shows from the data that, for example, the Scientific Education and Research Board, which has now been subsumed under this NRF itself, earlier almost 60% of its funding used to go to the Indian Institute of Technologies, and only 11% of its funding used to go to the state universities. So to tackle with all these challenges, the government formed the National Research Foundation in year of 2023. The major idea was actually propagated under the National Education Policy of 2020, where it was envisaged that this National Research Foundation will actually act as a kind of a coordinating agency between the researchers, the government body, and the primacy will actually be given to the industry participation. It also aimed to provide research grants not only to the individuals but also to fund the research and the infrastructure creation in your state universities. And for this purpose, the government envisaged that we will be creating a kind of a budget of 50,000 crore for the next 5 years, and thus this is a mission mode scheme. Now, this National Research Foundation, when it is relying upon this 50,000 crore budget to provide research grants to the individuals and to create infrastructure in the state universities, the idea was that only 28% of that will actually come by the government. So that amounts to around 14,000 crore. The rest 72% will actually come from the private sector participation, that was around 36,000 crore. Even the Scientific Education and Research Board was subsumed under this National Research Foundation, and another major objective was that whenever an individual will approach NRF that okay, I'm going to, let's say, do a research on genomics and just provide me certain grants for that, then such peer review has to be done within the 6 months itself. However, as highlighted by the today's article, there are certain issues which has emerged. So there exists an executive and governing board of the NRF, which is the major or the highest scientific decision making body currently in our country. The president of this executive and governing board is no one else but the Prime Minister. And under the National Research Foundation Act, the Prime Minister has got the power to nominate at least 5 members from the business community. However, as highlighted by the article, this executive and governing board has no representation from the Indian industry at all. So just imagine that, as we were discussing, one of the major aim was to give primacy to the industry, on which 72% of the funding is reliant upon, and that Indian industry has got no representation in this governing board. So for example, this 15-member governing board which has been created, it has only one industrialist on that board, and that is some Vadhavani, which is basically of American-based industrialist, which has certain Indian origin, and that's all. Also, there is no presence of state universities as well. So remember how the act has a major aim to improve the infrastructure of state universities. The same state universities are absent in this governing executive board. The 2 universities representation which has been provided, one has been given to the directors of Indian Institute of Technology and others has gone to the Tata Research Foundation, which is TIRF. At the same time, even if we are trying to improve the infrastructure of these universities, we have to keep this in our mind that the state government share in this gross expenditure on research and development is already abysmally low. That is only the 7% of the total country's expenditure. So there are certain major issues. Even if we look at the universal rankings of our universities, the top 10 universities, first of all, we don't have any university in 300 itself. Then just look at the name of all of these universities and tell me if you find out name of any state university. So if there exists such a poor infrastructure, how this National Research Foundation will be able to cope up and actually improve the research and development specifically in these poor state universities? Now, there are certain suggestions which can be implemented by the government, and this is the responsibility of you as a future bureaucrat to do that. What we can do? First is, we need to reduce the time between the application and the grant of the research. So if I am coming to you and I am saying I am going to do a study on genomics, please provide me grants as soon as possible, because many a times, because of this red tapeism and the bureaucratic apathy which exists, it takes years for the grant for the research. The second is, to fasten the process, we can do the e-filing of the research grants. The third is that such financing procedures has to be sorted out between the National Research Foundation and the state universities, and the researcher shall be given complete free hand, where that person shall focus upon the research rather being worried about the finances. The fourth is that we can actually use the corporate social responsibility funds from the private sector, and we can also utilize the subscription model of European Union. To understand that, let's say I am conducting a study on genomics. Now I find out that the Google's AI model AlphaFold, so that has just kind of decoded the protein structure, millions of such. So I want to use this information for my research, but because this research is patented, either I will have to pay a hefty amount or I will not have access to this patented research. Now, because such patented research are so expensive, many a times the researchers does not have access to them. What we can do is that our government can apply for this subscription model of European Union, where it is obvious that I do not require this patented information for the whole lifetime of mine. I just need a little bit of information, maybe a particular section of it. So I can have access to that exactly like how we subscribe to Netflix for 1 month. So I will get that access to that required information, and I will utilize that information in my research. And then after 1 month, my subscription can expire. The next is that we can create escrow accounts to ensure the return on investment. Why such time takes place actually for the government to pass the research grants? Because many a times these researchers, they apply for a certain innovative project and then they just start doing something else in their life altogether, and they survive on these grants which has been provided by the government. So for example, I took the grant from the government to study on genomics and I just started preparing for UPSC. And now I am doing my financial expenditure on the basis of the grants. So there we can create a third party escrow account where both the party, that is researcher and the government, can put a certain amount of money. So that will also ensure the accountability of the researcher, as well as the government will also have the insurity, and thus the research grant will become a faster approval process. So just keep these suggestions in your mind. Attempt this particular question. If possible, you can comment your answers in the comment box, and we move forward to the next news. As the Government of India has recently constituted various cabinet committees, including the country's highest decision-making bodies on Cabinet Committee on Security, Economics and Political Affairs, we are going to cover in this particular section the cabinet committees, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of executive. So a question arises here in mind. What exactly do we mean by the cabinet? Well, the cabinet, the term, has been mentioned in the constitution at only one place, and that is your Article 352, Clause 3 of the constitution, which basically says that whenever the president is passing the emergency or any such proclamation of emergency, that can be done only on the written advice of the cabinet. Now keep this in mind that when this particular provision has been added, obviously by the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1978, to act as a safeguard to the emergency provision. especially in the backdrop of emergency which was applied during the 1975 to 77 by the Indira Gandhi government. So now when we have understood that, okay, the term cabinet has featured only at once, does this article or this particular clause describe the cabinet? Well, it only says that such cabinet will consist of a council which consists of Prime Minister and other such minister of cabinet ranks which comes from the Council of Ministers. Now, this Council of Minister has been mentioned in the Article 75 of the Constitution, which basically says that any such Council of Minister, which is headed by the Prime Minister, is collectively responsible to which particular house? To Lok Sabha. So basically, what we can assess from this is that the cabinet is nothing but the part of the Council of Ministers. So what is the exact difference between the cabinet and the Council of Ministers? The Council of Ministers is basically consists of the wider body. So it consists of all the deputy ministers, the Minister of State, and the cabinet is a part of it. So basically, Council of Ministers is a wider body, and as per the 91st Constitutional Amendment Act of 2003, it is stated that such Council of Ministers cannot exceed 15% of the strength of Lok Sabha. So currently, what is the strength of Lok Sabha? 543. What will be the 15% of that? 81. So basically, the Council of Ministers cannot be more than 81. As per the 91st Constitutional Amendment Act. Also, currently in our 18th Lok Sabha, how many Council of Ministers we have? That is around 72. So in 18th Lok Sabha, we have 72 ministers. On the other hand, the cabinet is the part of this Council of Ministers. So this is basically a smaller body. So for example, in your 18th Lok Sabha, out of this 72 Council of Ministers also consist of your Prime Minister. So out of this 72, there are currently 30 cabinet ministers. Now, what is the difference between the functioning of this Council of Ministers and the cabinet minister? So try to understand this, that there are certain portfolios which are given to various ministers. Someone can become an agriculture minister. Someone can become the minister of Jal Shakti department. Now, some of them forms the part of these important cabinet committees which has been designed by the government, and those are called as cabinet ministers. So these council ministers, they actually took the individual charges of the ministry which they are responsible for. So let's say if I have become an agriculture minister, so I will take the charge of agriculture minister, like whatever will happen in the field of agriculture, that will fall under my jurisdiction. Now, in this particular sense, I do not have any collective function. However, these cabinet members or the cabinet ministers, as they also form the part of cabinet committees, they serve a kind of a collective functions, where these cabinet can actually pass binding decisions on this Council of Ministers, and this Council of Ministers functions are basically determined by this smaller cabinet. Then there can be certain ministers who are very close to the Prime Minister. So that forms the part of your kitchen cabinet. Now, when we have understood the kind of the difference which exists between the Council of Minister and the Cabinet Minister, let's try to examine certain trends in the 18th Lok Sabha. So when we talk about the cabinet ministers, we can say that the number of ministerial berths, cabinet minister, minister of state who has got an independent charge, or the minister of state and the position of prime minister, all of that has increased over the years. So as we can say that in this particular 2024, there are around 119 ministerial berths, which is almost highest in the last 3 decades. At the same time, if we talk about that from where these ministers are actually coming from, so most of the members has always been from Lok Sabha. And as we can see that the Rajya Sabha MPs who become the minister, that has been very minuscule, around 20% around, and that has remained stagnant. The ministers who has appointed currently, some of the prominent who come from the Rajya Sabha are your Nirmala Sitharaman, your External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, even your Railway Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw. So now, when we have understood about all this, let's try to read a little about the cabinet committees. So there are 8 prominent cabinet committees which exist. One is on your political affair. The political affair, so let's say if there is any big issue which is taking place in our country, let's say the kind of insurgency which is taking place in Manipur. So which cabinet committee will sit on that and dwell upon or deliberate upon that issue? That is your political affairs committee, one of the most important one. So obviously that will be headed by the Prime Minister. The second is your economic affairs committee. So let's say the inflation is just breaking all the records in the country. The things has become so much expensive that the burning of the note is much more cheaper than the note itself, which actually happened in your Germany back in 1939 depression time. So now when we are talking about that, these economic affairs will be deliberated by the Economic Affairs Committee, again which is headed by the Prime Minister. Then there exists an appointment committee. So all the appointments to the major institutions such as public sector banks, your important statutory bodies, all of that is done by the appointment committee. Then there is a committee on security, a very prominent committee which maintains the security of our nation. Obviously that will be headed by Prime Minister as well. The appointment committee is headed by Prime Minister as well. Then there are 2 committees which were added back in year 2019. So this is the recent innovations such as investment and growth and employment and skilled labor. Beside this, there are 2 other committees. One is your committee on accommodation and your committee on parliamentary affairs. Normally the charge is given to Home Minister, but there is no fixed such practice as well. Now there are certain key details which we need to remember about the cabinet committees. The first is that they are extra constitutional, which means that they are nowhere mentioned in our constitution. Rather, they are regulated under the rules of business provided under the 1961. And even the non-cabinet ministers, they are not debarred from the membership of such cabinet committees. They can surely take the participation in such committees. Now, when we have understood in detail about these cabinet committees, let's try to read about the recently constituted cabinet committees which was in the news. The first is your cabinet committee on security, which is obviously headed by the respected Prime Minister, followed by the Defense Minister, Rajnath Singh, Home Minister, Amit Shah, your Finance Minister, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, and your External Affairs Minister, that is S. Jai Shankar. Now, all of these ministers also forms the part of your economic affairs, that is Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs as well. Also, there are certain other ministers who has been included in this Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. That is your Road and Transport Minister, the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Heavy Industries, the Minister of Commerce, Piyush Goyal, the Minister of Education, and the Minister of Panchayati Raj. Then there is third important cabinet committee, that is Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs. Here again, the Prime Minister is part of that, the Home Minister is part of that, Finance Minister as well as Minister of Panchayati Raj. The other ministers which has included, which do not form part of other 2 committees, they are the Health Minister, the Social Justice Minister, the Minister of Civil Aviation, Tribal Affairs, as well as the Minister of Jal Shakti. So remember this segregation which has been provided for easy learning of which ministers form the part of which important cabinet committees. With this, we move forward to the next news. In the 6th Ministerial Council meeting of the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, the representatives have announced an integrated partnership with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This global partnership on artificial intelligence forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of artificial intelligence and your GS2 paper under the theme of important international institutions. So first we'll try to understand what is this artificial intelligence which we are going to discuss. We will try to understand that from our real life example. So you guys might be setting up a timer on your AC in these summer months to save on electricity bills, and then it switches off after a particular duration. Or in the crowded lanes of Bombay and Bangalore, you guys might have been guided by the Google auntie which tells us which exit to take. Or let's say a much simpler example where you guys might be getting recommendations on your Netflix account to watch a new movie based on the recommendation or based on the choice of your latest watched movies. So basically, all of this forms an example of artificial intelligence, which is nothing but the simulation of human intelligence by the machine through the practice of machine learning or big data analytics. And this artificial intelligence offers us a lot of benefits. For example, it helps us with forming the emails or writing. So for example, the use of ChatGPT, the large language models, or various mobile applications such as your Google Map, then in your social networking sites as well, or to improve the online shopping. So for example, if you are looking for a particular shirt, we can just feed the data and then it provides us the exact kind of shirt which we might like. Then with the use of mobile banking. So when is the last time when you guys have actually ventured to the bank for the official paperwork? I still remember the long hours which it used to take, especially in the State Bank of India. Then the equipped personal assistants, which it can become, such as your Alexa, or it can also involve us in the various kind of travel applications. So there are several applications which this artificial intelligence helps us in our daily life. And that is the reason that there has been a large scale integration of artificial intelligence in our daily life. So for example, 91% of the Indian companies are actually planning to use their data to train artificial intelligence models. 62% of the companies are saying that they are going to do so. Almost 70% of the firms in India have already got artificial intelligence projects up. And 70% of the technology firms are piloting these projects. However, such large-scale use of artificial intelligence also throws to us, in front of us, a lot of challenges. The first is obviously the high planetary cost of running such large artificial intelligence-based models. The second is the vulnerability of these AI models. So, for example, if certain AI tool has got a lot of information about us, it can also lead to a large data leakage as well. It can compromise our right to privacy as guaranteed under the Constitution. Also a question in your prelims examination. Then there are also a lot of fragility which is associated with this artificial intelligence model. So for example, if there exists a kind of a bias in a human, and that bias is being fed through machine learning into these systems, it can have a large adversary impact on the society, because then these machines will adopt those biases as well. The next is that there exists a kind of opaqueness on their mechanism. So we exactly don't know how big their infrastructure is. We exactly don't know how to regulate this new artificial intelligence tools which are being devised. So for example, even in our country today, we don't have a particular regulation related to the self-driving cars of Tesla, which runs on artificial intelligence. Or there is emergence of the exploitative surveillance capitalism. So for example, these daily data which we are feeding to these particular apps, they can actually use us to create a kind of an echo chamber around us, because now they know exactly what we purchase, what are the kind of items which we are purchasing on daily basis. On the basis of that, the app can actually get to know that what is our income status. Then from that income status, it can actually start targeting us to deliver us some certain kind of product. So that is basically that our choices are not our choices anymore. Rather, it has become the choices of the machines. The next is the instructability of AI tools, as they lack a kind of accountability. So for example, let's say that we deploy a kind of an artificial intelligence based super soldier in the future, and that super soldier comes across an enemy. Now this particular person does not belong to our country. Let's say it belongs to the enemy country, but at the same time this person is completely weaponless. However, the directive which has been given to this artificial intelligence is to eliminate any person who does not belong to our country. So it is obvious that this artificial intelligence does not have empathy or compassionate values like us humans. So what kind of repercussions such artificial intelligence deployment can have on humanity? So considering all these challenges, this global partnership on artificial intelligence was formed in June 2020 with the major theme of bridging the gap between the theory and the practical use of artificial intelligence. and it acts as a kind of an international cooperation. So let's say if there is any global research which is taking place or any tools which is being devised globally, so all the member countries who are part of this global partnership on artificial intelligence, they all will have access to all of this research which is taking place on artificial intelligence. So it kinds of create a coordination and cooperation platform. Now, the secretariat of this global partnership on artificial intelligence was held by OECD, that is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, whose secretariat is at Paris. Now, India was one among the founding members, and currently this organization has 29 members. India also held the summit of this GPI back in 2023, which took place in your Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. Now, there was an issue which was arising up related to this GPI. It was that OECD was saying that it will start working under the OECD's Working Party on Artificial Governance, that is AIGO. However, India and Japan, countries like this, they actually pushed back this idea because they said that if we will include this GPI under the framework of OECD, that will lead to the dilution of GPI's role as a multi-stakeholder organization. Thus, because of India's effort, this GPI will not work under this OECD's Working Party on Artificial Governance. Rather, it will be an integrated part with the OECD. Thus, the countries who are not part of OECD, such as one being India, they will also be treated par with the OECD members. Now a question might be arriving in your mind that what is this OECD about which we are hearing about so much? OECD is basically an association of 38 high income countries, which includes Europe and the American countries such as your USA and Canada and the regions of Pacific, which was basically established back in the year of 1961 to ensure the smooth sailing of the economic growth and the development, and thus it aids the developing countries even outside membership to promote economic reforms. Now these high income countries, they almost forms the 80% of the world trade and almost 42% of the world's GDP. So keep this GPI and OECD in your mind, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to learn about the World Heritage Committee, as India will host the 46th session of UNESCO's World Heritage Committee from July 21 to 31 in Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. This World Heritage Committee forms an important component of a prelims paper under the larger theme of current affairs of international importance. So let's try to learn about certain salient features about this World Heritage Committee, which basically forms an important component of UNESCO. UNESCO, which stands for United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, and forms a prime agency of United Nations. The major task of this World Heritage Committee is to implement the World Heritage Convention of 1972. Where listing of any World Heritage Sites anywhere in the world. So for example, in our country we have 42 World Heritage Sites. None of them can be passed unless and until it is agreed by this World Heritage Committee. So this World Heritage Committee has 21 state parties, and these 21 state parties are elected among the members of United Nations General Assembly for a term of 6 years. However, certain report article says that many of the members actually take voluntary retirement after 4 years, so the other members also get the chance. Now, as we have understood about this World Heritage Committee, let's try to learn a little about the important World Heritage Sites which are designated by this World Heritage Committee. So in our country, we have 42 sites. 40 of them has been listed here. So for example, in our country, we have 32 cultural sites, 7 natural sites, and there is only one mixed site, that is your Khangchenjunga National Park here. So just have a quick overlook about all these important sites here, and remember that these are very important and the favorites of UPSC. As we can see from the 2024 prelims paper as well, where UPSC asked that which of these UNESCO World Heritage Sites were recently included. So the first option is your Shanti Niketan, which is correct. It was included in 2023. Then there is your Rani Ki Vav, as you guys can see here, in the region of Gujarat. So this was added back in 2014. So this is an incorrect option. The third is the Sacred Assembles of Hoysalas. So yes, that is correct. That is also included in 2023. And the Mahabodhi temple at Bodh Gaya, which you guys can see here, the Mahabodhi temple. So this was added back in 2004. So it is obvious that only two option is correct. I have solved one question for you. The task for the day is just solve this another question related to UNESCO, now related to intangible cultural heritage site, and comment your answers in the comment box. We move forward to the next section of the news, where we are going to cover some important news which can actually help you to eliminate some important statements in the prelims examination. So let's start with the first news. The first news which talks about India's public debt. What is public debt? Public debt to GDP ratio, it basically compares the size of a country debt to its economic growth. The lower is this ratio, the better is the country's ability to repay its borrowings. Remember the borrowings which we were talking about. So now India currently has around 85% of the public debt, which is basically the debt included of both central and state government. 85% of what? 85% of our GDP currently. That is what India owes to the various lending institutions from where it has taken the debt. Is India's debt is one among the highest? Absolutely not. Just look at the other countries such as Japan, which has got the debt of 239%, USA, which has got 116%. So we can say that our debt is still very much on the sustainable line, and this was exactly the saying of the National Council of Applied Economic Research as well in the article published today. The second news is about the North Atlantic Treaty Organizations, which celebrated its 75 years of establishment, as it was established back in 4th April of 1949. What is NATO? NATO is basically an intergovernmental military alliance which was created back in 1949, and it draws this mandate from the Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, which provides that any independent state can join any collective organization for its own security. So when NATO was being pushed by USA and other European countries back in 1949, against which force they were seeking this protection from? That was your socialist USSR. The USSR, which disintegrated in 1991. But even after that, if you can see here, the NATO's European expansion has continued, right? So for example, in your year of 2023, the Finland joined it. In 2024, the Sweden joined it, and this eastward expansion of NATO has been one of the primary cause of the Russia-Ukraine war which has taken place. Currently, after the joining of Sweden, it has around 32 members, and the headquarters of this NATO is where? At Brussels, Belgium. So remember these important details about NATO. We move forward to the next news, which talks about the mosquito menace. The news in your Indian Express basically deals with that the researchers has found a pair of the mosquito hormone which is named FNPF, which works to activate or suppress the craving for blood which these mosquitoes has. And these mosquitoes basically causes several diseases which can become a statement in your prelims examination. So remember these diseases such as your malaria and dengue, the West Nile virus, the yellow fever, the Zika virus, the chikungunya, as well as your lymphatic filariasis. Now we move forward to the last news, where we'll talk about Apophis. What is Apophis? Apophis is basically an asteroid. Earlier it was being expected that this asteroid is going to hit our planet. However, now any such assumption has been completely dashed, and it is said that it is not expected to have a chance of impacting Earth from at least 100 years of now. Now, as per the NASA's estimate, in year of 2029, this asteroid will pass close to Earth as close to 32,000 kilometers. Now, to deal with such asteroid which can just fall on Earth and can have magnanimous devastation occur on Earth, NASA has created a double asteroid redirection test, also called as DART. Now, ISRO has also said, as India's premier space agency, it has said that it is keen on participating in any such interplanetary defense mission, where it can guide such mission with the help of the telemetry, tracking and command center or ISTRAC which it has created. Also, India also needs to create such asteroid redirection systems as well. So we need to work upon that line. On this noble thought, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.